Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has refused to sign the controversial Anti-Homosexuality Bill into law. He sent it back to Parliament for amendments. Museveni's decision comes after he met his party's members after they voted to pass the bill last month. The bill proposes sentences of up to 10 years in jail and the death penalty for same-sex relations. Citizens who fail to report the relationships could also face sanctions. Uganda has faced international pressure to veto the piece of legislation. The US has warned of economic consequences. The United Nations has described it as a violation of human rights, while here at home, the EFF has condemned the bill. Let's have a discussion about this development now with Neela Ghoshal, who is a Senior Director of Law, Policy and Research at Outright International, and Adrian Jjuuko, who is the Executive Director at the Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum. Thank you so much for making time for us, Neela and Adrian. Let's start with you, Neela. When I saw the story, I was thinking, okay, could this mean that Museveni is opposed to the bill? But to be clear, it's not necessarily that he's opposed to the bill's punishment. He just wants lawmakers to study this issue of rehabilitation, whatever that means.
Yes, there's a couple things that came out of Museveni's statement. The first is that he is essentially promoting what we describe as conversion practices, more commonly known as conversion therapy against LGBTQ people. And conversion practices are attempts to convert people from being queer or transgender to being straight and cisgender. Outright has conducted substantial research on conversion practices, including in Africa. These take place in the mental health sector, but also in religious spaces and in kind of traditional spiritual spaces as well. And LGBTQ people who are forced to undergo conversion practices are subjected to really serious harm, physical and mental harm. And so what Museveni is saying in terms of quote unquote rehabilitation both contradicts everything that he said in the past about needing to defer to scientists on understanding whether same-sex attraction is something that has a genetic basis, for instance, and also is essentially advocating an entirely different set of human rights abuses, which is subjecting people forcibly to conversion practices so that they can avoid prison time. So that's a problem. Another problem in Museveni's statement from State House is that he essentially says that he applauds parliamentarians for their stand on homosexuality, which means that he is positioning himself as completely behind the intention behind the bill. And this is a logic that we consider to be essentially a genocidal logic, right? The State House is arguing against the use of the death penalty, right? So they're going to reduce the criminal sentences in the bill, but they want to wipe out the existence of lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer people. Yeah. And that is what Museveni is saying in applauding parliamentarians for passing this bill, and in really only proposing minor changes to the substance of the bill. So much of the bill remains, criminalization remains, enforced conversion practices remain, and the provision on the so-called promotion or normalization of homosexuality remains, which means just by somebody saying, I think it's okay that my son is gay, or I think it's okay that my coworker is transgender, that person is normalizing homosexuality and can be subjected to a prison sentence. So the bill is still, what Museveni is proposing is still completely in violation of basic human rights principles. It's a chance for activists to re-engage and push for some further changes, but it's not something that I can say that we're very happy with in terms of the substance of that press release. Yeah, and Adrian, what do you think the next process then is going to produce, given that he clearly very much supports the bill and even the punishment that comes with the crimes that are contained in that bill? From what I'm hearing from Neela, what Museveni is basically saying is, well, let's also give an opportunity for those who may be found criminal in their behavior for being quote-unquote homosexuals. But let's give the opportunity for those who may say, okay, let me live the quote-unquote normal life now, because that's what the spokesperson of the president has suggested. So those who may want to change then would then be given an opportunity not to be sentenced to these extreme sentences.
And there lies, I think, a big problem, in addition to what Neela said, if you think about what Museveni is saying, that we should not penalize those who come out and want to be rehabilitated. What this means for consensual same-sex relations is that if someone is in a consensual relationship, in case they are found out, what happens is that one of them simply makes themselves a victim and goes for rehabilitation, and then essentially turning one LGBT person against another. And that's something that we argue against, and that's something that would be really dangerous. In terms of next steps, when you come to think of it, now that he has is going to send it back to Parliament, it means that Parliament has to go through the process again, pass the law, and then send it back to him again. Let's see how that goes and how Parliament is ready, how fast they're ready to move. But indications from before indicate that if they use the same speeds, then we are likely to see the bill passing again very fast.
Yeah. Neela, the president has been under pressure from the international community to veto this bill, which needs his signature to become law. The United States has been warning of economic consequences if this legislation is enacted. There's a group of United Nations experts that have described this bill, if enacted, as an egregious violation of human rights. I imagine all of that noise hasn't moved him a single bit, given the statements that he's made in support of this bill. And perhaps it will be naive of us to think for some reason, miraculously, he's going to start listening to the US and listening to the international pressure and think twice about this.
Well, this is exactly what we anticipated that Museveni would do, is that he would propose some minor changes in the bill to make it look as if he is not entirely on board with the most egregious provisions of the bill, and that ultimately Parliament would pass a bill and he would assent to it that still is a drastic violation of human rights. And so that's the situation we're in. I think that Museveni is making a calculation that if the death penalty is removed, right? Because in addition to the language around rehabilitation, that's also something that that we understand that the Uganda government is calling for at this point. If the death penalty is removed, will the international community still be as up in arms against this bill? And my argument is that they certainly should, because this bill is horrible for queer Ugandans, it's horrible for their allies, and it's also horrible for anybody in the nonprofit sector, the corporate sector, the humanitarian sector, working in Uganda, who respects the basic human rights of LGBTIQ people, because all of these people could be subject to punishment of up to 20 years in prison under the promotion and normalization language in this bill. So I think Museveni is playing a game of let's get rid of the death penalty, let's maybe provide people some way out of some of the criminal sentences, let's reconsider the reporting requirement, which was also one of the most horrific provisions of this bill. And let's pass something that is only slightly less offensive to the basic human conscience. And our call as outright on the international community is don't be fooled. This bill is not acceptable. Even with the changes that Museveni proposes, it remains absolutely out of line with basic standards of not only international human rights law, but human decency. And so therefore, the pressure needs to remain on. And I hope that the corporate sector in particular is being very loud and clear with Museveni that it will be difficult for them to continue business as usual if any version of this bill is passed.
Yeah, and I imagine whatever is going to culminate into this process, the anti-gay sentiment in Uganda has grown in recent weeks. Thank you to both of you for making time for us. Sadly, we are out of time. That is Neela Ghoshal, a Senior Director of Law, Policy and Research at Outright International, and Adrian Jjuuko, who's the Executive Director at the Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum.